talking A Wounded Fawn. This is directed and co-written by Travis Stevens and is essentially a serial killer art house movie, or at least kind of. So what is the story here? Well, I hope you're brushed up on your kind of Greek mythology and Greek tragedies, because that's going to be important in this movie. It focuses on a serial killer called Bruce, who seems to target successful, attractive, maybe wealthy women. We see an example at the beginning of the movie, and he kind of goes through somewhat of an elaborate way to kind of get his victims without kind of spoiling anything there for you. And the bulk of the story focuses on this one particular woman who he meets and invites to kind of this cabin in the woods. And we all know nothing ever good happens when you go up to a cabin in the woods. And, you know, he's taken her up there with the intention to kill her. Now, he seems to be somewhat kind of mentally disturbed. He keeps seeing visions of this kind of red owl totem that, you know, according to him, is ultimately the one in the driving seat telling him to kind of do these killings and stuff. But as we get to this cabin in the woods, you know, things may not go quite to plan. Now, this could be through a number of reasons. Is there something else at play here? Is there kind of a paranormal force out in this forest that's kind of trying to influence events on the inside? Is there kind of this this all the kind of what experiences, certainly in the second half of the movie, as they kind of because we have a head wound that is kind of inflicted on someone within the movie, and it's just the hallucinations that are caused by brain damage? Or is this just the mind of a serial killer messed up finally kind of with his thoughts kind of catching up on him? Now, you'll have to watch the movie and make your own decisions on that one, but let's discuss what I think works in this film. So this movie is two distinct halves. The first half is played quite straight. The second half is where you get into the more surreal elements to it. But I guess, without kind of spoiling anything for you here, I guess that you could say there is a reason why you're experiencing these more surreal elements. The first half, I would say, is the stronger half, in my opinion, because the narrative is pretty, it's pretty easy to follow. But I've got to say, the setup is very interesting. The tale of Bruce, the serial killer, going through somewhat of an elaborate kind of ruse to attract his victim. And, I won't say exactly what happens, but it's very much a kind of seduction to a certain degree. And I find it kind of fascinating. You're given kind of hints about why he's doing it, what's pushing him, without kind of spelling it out for you. But the thing that really sold it for me is the acting. I've got to say, I thought the acting here was very, very impressive, particularly by our main kind of female victim, if you like. I think the actress is called Sarah Lind, and she did a fantastic job. It's a very kind of down-to-earth kind of character. Now, one of the things I really enjoyed about her was, she doesn't tend to, the character doesn't tend to fall in these kind of typical movie cliche decisions. She seems, when she gets a sniff of there's not something right, she wants to go. She wants to get out of there. But obviously, she's out in the middle of nowhere, so that presents a certain problem. But nonetheless, I quite like the idea here that, she's kind of getting this sense that something isn't quite right, and her senses are kind of like going into overdrive, and she acts like a normal person would do in this situation, which I found really refreshing. The dialogue is a little hokey at times. I'll say that, but the performances I think were very good, particularly from her. But our serial killer Bruce as well gives this kind of like unsettling kind of Ted Bundy-esque kind of vibe. I thought they were both pretty good, and that's kind of who you see mostly on this kind of screen here. Now, the movie is a contemporary movie. Things like rideshare is mentioned. We see people who use mobile phones, but it has a kind of a vintage look in many ways. We have, for example, older style cars. The film looks like it's had this kind of filter on it, which kind of gives it this film grade, a kind of a 70s kind of grindhouse feel to it. And at times it does look like a kind of a genuine movie from like the early 80s or the kind of the late 70s and things like that. So it does have that kind of vintage feel, some of the kind of the fashions, but it isn't like a period piece. It's not set in a kind of a you know, a part setting, but it gives it a somewhat of a unique kind of visual kind of flavour, and I think, you know, fans of kind of like slasher, serial killer, even giallo kind of fans may certainly dig that kind of, at least the first half of this movie. Now on to the second half. Now, an event happens that I think you could say triggers the second half, and we see certainly more paranormal, surreal, art house, experimental kind of things happen in that. And because the, you know, a character sustains a head injury, you could argue that it's essentially what we're seeing on screen is the kind of the effects of this kind of head injury, basically. Or it even could be, you know, the problem is here, the guy is already kind of seeing things. So is it just kind of going into kind of overdrive? Or is it something genuinely kind of paranormal? I mean, the movie certainly has some interesting visuals, certainly somewhat kind of like, you know, disturbing in a kind of in a way. There is some scenes here that they do use a bit of gore and kind of some interesting kind of effects, which I think look visually kind of pretty interesting to kind of look at. Some of the effects don't always do, but some of them do kind of hit the mark, and I think are pretty good. You know, so, you know, it's an interesting movie, certainly in the second half. And I do think you can kind of, for those who don't like art house movies, and I will say, I'm not a huge fan of art house films, there's enough there where I think you can kind of, it doesn't come out of left field, you can kind of understand what they're trying to do here. And like I said, there's a lot of symbolism, there's a lot of metaphors, particularly in regards to a kind of Greek tragedy. Now, there's a lot of talk at the beginning of the film about this particular statue. It's worth listening to kind of what is said on that bit, because it kind of reflects on the remainder of the film if you do watch this. And I've got to say, I think the movie is filmed very well. You know, like I said, it helps with this kind of this filter. I'm not sure if it was, you know, actually filmed on film or just kind of it has a filter. But it looks, you know, I've got to say, the cinematography here, the use of light, really does kind of give you this foreboding kind of feeling. Okay, so what doesn't work? I have to say, I think the first half is pretty faultless. You know, some of the dialogue, I could say, maybe is a little on the hokey side at times. But to be honest with you, that first act I thought was strong. Now, this only is a 2-act movie. The second half, this is where I feel the problem for most people will lie. Those of you who enjoy art house movies may like the surreal elements to this. But to me, although I found it, you know, visually kind of interesting, it kind of slows the narrative, because ultimately, again, I'm going to try and avoid spoilers here, but you could argue that it's an effect of an incident that happens in the film. But it really is just the whole the second half of the film just kind of dealing with the ramifications from that. And, you know, the movie could have realistically, narratively, gone on for another 5-10 minutes after that kind of first half, and the narrative would have finished. But instead, we get the whole second half of the movie stretched out with this kind of weird imagery, and the kind of the story kind of just grinds to a halt. And I've got to be honest with you, I think it kind of like derails the movie as a whole for a large portion of the kind of the narrative, certainly, structure of it. Some of the visuals I do like. I thought they were strong, but there is some wonky effects here as well. There's a little bit of like CGI, which is quite distracting. Some of the kind of the imagery, you know, it looks a little hokey, to be honest. Somewhat deliberately so, certainly in one scene, but nonetheless, I'm not sure it all kind of worked, to be honest. And I don't think the actors here are given much to do in regards to the performance, really, because it's just lots of kind of weirdness. And as I say, I don't really feel the narrative is particularly strong. So those of you who want an experience with kind of odd visuals and stuff, make it along with that. And I do think, you know, you can say it's not just being weird for weird's sake. I do feel you can connect it as to what happens, but I don't know if I particularly think it needed to be a whole half of the movie to kind of get this experience across. And ultimately it becomes a little bit of a struggle to get through that kind of second half of the movie, which is a shame because the first half is so strong. But clearly the decision here was to make this kind of like this weirder art house, you know, starless kind of movie filled with metaphors and whatnot. But I don't know really, you know, how many people will genuinely enjoy that kind of part of it. But there are some interesting things to look at least. Overall, I still think this is an above average movie, certainly buoyed by the very, very strong first half of the movie, and still somewhat interesting second half, although we do feel it's very, very self-indulgent on that kind of second half. Overall, I'll give this movie a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.